So recently, I have been watching the Sword Art Online progressive movies and I've really enjoyed them. So it got me thinking, is Sword Art Online as bad as we remember? Well, sit back and I'll tell you my experience rewatching this series for the first time in 10 years. And if you want to as well, if you like the video, leave a like, it helps out a ton, and maybe subscribe as well. I make new videos every single week, so you'll always get a good constant stream of videos from me to enjoy. Anyway, let's get into the video. Okay, I will admit, I was a little nervous going into this. I kept asking, what if it really does suck like everyone remembers? But then I watched episode 1, and I will say, that shit still slaps hard over 10 years later. This show has one of the best starts to any show, and it's crazy. Like, the episode starts off in a good state, everyone is super excited to play this new game, the first of its kind. But then the reveal happens. We see the logout button for the game is completely gone, and you can't leave. That is the first sign that something ain't right here. Then we get the speech from Akihiko Kaiba, and to this day, that shit is still one of the coldest speeches in anime. He just straight up tells everyone that they can't log out and that if they try to, they will die. He then forces all the players into looking like themselves, which is crazy. This speech still gets you going even this long after the show came out. So episode 1 was a banger start to this series. I guess now we move on to see if the rest of the show holds up like this intro episode did. Alright, so episode 2. Was it as good as episode 1? In some ways, yeah, and in others, not so much. So first, the episode starts off with us learning that 1 month has already passed and that 2,000 people have already died in the game. And we jump into a meeting of people discussing how they're going to fight the floor 1 boss. This meeting is pretty standard. We get some setups for some things, and we also learn some stuff about the world. We also get introduced to some new characters in this episode, 2 of which are going to be important. But we see a divide between the people who played the beta test and the people who bought the game a month ago. This sets up a conflict that will be relevant in this episode. After this meeting, we jump a few hours after at night where everyone is partying and having fun. There, Asuna and Kirito have a conversation to try and get to know each other better. Then, after that is the boss fight. This is the best part of the episode. The animation is on point for this episode. It was also good in episode 1, but here it's slightly better. The boss fight is really where we see a divide between the beta testers and the non-beta testers, as after the fight, Kirito gets a lot of hate for being a beta tester, and he takes all of that onto himself as to not have the others be hated as much after the death of one of the players in the fight who was also a beta tester told him to help the reputation of the others. This is also where we see one of the dumbest nicknames in anime history, Beater. This is such a stupid name, but hey, it's what the story chose, so we have to live with it for the entire series. So episode 2 was still good, but it was slightly worse than that insane first episode. Alright, so episode 3 is a sad one, but before that, the beginning of the episode is actually really nice. The episode opens up with Kirito and a bunch of people celebrating. They're thanking Kirito for helping them out and ask them to join their guild. He accepts. The only thing about this scene I still don't understand is why he decided to hide his level. Like, they wouldn't have known he was a beater from his level alone. They probably would have just assumed that he was on the assault team or something. But anyway, he hit his level, and that would end up being a problem for the rest of the episode. This episode is all about Kirito building up a relationship with these people, and that is exactly what he does. Seeing the building of a relationship here is nice, and it really puts into perspective that these are real people just trying to survive in this world. But sadly, all good things must come to an end, and it certainly did here. We see the group get trapped in a monster room, unable to escape, and there we see all the other guild members minus Kirito die. These deaths really hit hard as we had spent the entire episode up to this point building up that relationship. This episode was used as the way to let you know that it could literally be anyone who dies, even someone close to you, so you shouldn't ever let your guard down. The second half of this episode takes place 8 months after this incident, and here we see a depressed Kirito on Christmas trying to fight a boss solo to get a revival item and try to revive one of those guild members from back then. He gets the item, but it can only be used 10 seconds after the death of that person, so it's useless to him. So he gives it to Klein, who followed him here. He then gets a message from one of the dead guild mates that sent a message to be received on Christmas. This message is what will break you in this episode. It is a message to tell Kirito to not blame himself for their deaths, and instead he should try to live. And you get a song and it is super sad. Honestly, this episode is a step up from episode 2, so far, this series is pretty solid. I haven't found much about the series that I hate yet. Although, Kirito is a pretty boring character so far, but that's really it. Alright, episode 4 is the first episode where I straight up didn't care. Like, it was a fine episode, and we meet another character that's going to be important later, but really, this episode has nothing of real substance in comparison to the first 3 episodes. This episode starts off with Silica leaving a party that she was traveling with after one of the members tried to steal the items she has in the middle of a dangerous forest. Later that night, she gets lost fighting in the forest and nearly dies fighting. She even loses her pet, who she considers her best friend. Kirito saves her, and they go on an adventure to get this special flower that they can revive the beast. Kirito says she reminds him of his little sister, and quite frankly, I have never seen the resemblance. Later in the video we'll talk about her, but right now I can say Silica and Kirito's sister don't really resemble each other all that much, like in any way. On this adventure to get the flower, they get ambushed by a player killing guild, and Kirito puts them in their place. He reveals that chasing after them was his goal to begin with, and that he was going to arrest them. We get the famous scene of him being referred to as the Black Swordsman, and a bunch of players attacking him and his HP not dropping at all. This episode was okay. It was the first episode in the series so far that I got minimal enjoyment from, but let's see if that continues into the next episode. Alright, so episode 5 is the worst episode in the series so far. It is a setup episode to a 2-episode arc, and honestly, it was pretty mid. This episode starts off with a meeting to discuss how to beat the next floor boss, but that's not really important. It is just a setup to see Asuna and Kirito's relationship at this point. In town, Asuna and Kirito hear a scream and we see a player get killed inside a safe zone. That is the start of the main plot of the episode. They discuss possible ways it could have happened and see a weapon that did the killing. They talk to somebody in the crowd who says they knew the player who was killed and walked her home. Afterwards, they get the weapon appraised by Egiol, the other character I mentioned in episode 2. He tells us the name of the creator of the weapon. Then, they discuss with the girl and she reveals that the person who made the weapon was also in her old guild, and now we got a mystery on our hands. She tells us the backstory of how her guild got destroyed and how there was a divide among her guild in favor of selling or keeping a rare item they got from a monster. With this divide and the death of their guild master, the guild disbanded, but we learn of one of the other players who was opposed to selling the item. After this conversation with the guy from her former guild, she starts to freak out and backs into a window where she is killed by a knife. And that is the end of the episode. This episode isn't great. The mystery is easily solvable, and this is only the first half of the arc. Now, mind you, I have seen this series before, obviously, but it has been a long time and my memory is hazy. So the fact that I already know how this is going to end means that this mystery wasn't very good and that the whole episode is kind of just okay at best. Anyway, let's get into the next episode and the second half of this arc. Episode 6 picks up right where the last episode left off. We see Kirito chase the person who presumably threw the knife and killed that person. He loses track of him and he teleports away. Then it moves on to a discussion about how this could have happened, where Kirito then pieces together that they didn't die and instead they used their items' durability to their advantage. The moment their items ran out of durability, they teleported away and made it look like they died. At the same time as this discussion, we see something else going on with the two players who faked their death and the other guy in that conversation. They used this opportunity to try to get the other guy to confess to killing their guildmaster. And although he did betray his guild, ultimately he didn't kill his guildmaster. That is when we get introduced to the murder guild, Laughing Coffin. They're an important guild for the overall story of SAO, but anyway, they were ambushed and nearly all died. But that is when Kirito comes to save the day and he shoos them away and reveals the truth about what happened that day. They reveal that the murderer was the guildmaster's husband. We then see him and Asuna come out of the woods where he explains his motive, which is stupid by the way. She changed and grew stronger and he didn't like that, so he killed her. And that's basically the end of the episode. I did leave out something else important in this episode, and it wasn't really relevant to the plot of the episode as a whole, but this episode features a lot of development in the relationship of Asuna and Kirito, which we will see blossom later in the series. But anyway, this episode was pretty mid, and this series is starting to get a little boring after only 6 episodes. I don't hate it, but these past 3 episodes haven't been very good, and I can definitely see a drop in the storytelling. But anyway, let's hope it gets better with the next episode. Episode 7 was a massive improvement over the previous few episodes. The episode starts with Asuna in a blacksmith shop getting her sword repaired. They have some fun talking and they subtly hint towards Asuna liking Kirito. The next scene is Kirito walking into the shop looking for a new sword to use, and while he's there he shatters her best sword. So they go on an adventure to get a material to make an even better sword. While out, they have a pretty fun adventure and crack a few jokes at each other's expense, and it's all just pretty fun overall. Then we get to the fight against the dragon, and it's brief, but it's pretty cool. They fall into a hole, stay there the whole night having a conversation and growing closer, and then, come morning, they find what they were looking for and escape the hole on the back of the dragon that knocked them in there in the first place. The visuals in this scene are insane and still look really good. After this, she makes the new sword. Asuna then comes in worried for her friend, where it is basically all but confirmed that they were talking about Kirito at the beginning of the episode. This episode was a lot of fun, way better than the previous few episodes. This is the first episode with Kirito's iconic appearance that we see him in throughout the rest of the series. So overall, episode 7 was a step up. Let's hope this continues going into the Asuna-Kirito love story. So episode 8 is another solid episode. It is the start of 2 separate arcs. The first one is the Asuna-Kirito romance, which will be more prominent as the series goes on. The next is the setup to all the stuff that is happening in Asuna's guild. We see suspicious stuff going on, but let's start at the beginning. This episode starts off with Kirito fighting in some dungeon where he explains that it's already been nearly 2 years since he got trapped in SAO. Afterwards, outside, he finds a rare cooking ingredient, and since he can't cook, he was going to sell it, and then Asuna walks in. She uses the excuse that she was just checking in on him, but we all know she just wanted to see him. Afterwards, there's a little altercation with Asuna's bodyguard who gets into an argument with Kirito about Asuna hanging out with him. But that gets resolved quickly when she uses her authority to tell him to fuck off. Afterwards, we get some couple moments between Asuna and Kirito. It all just feels like two lovers enjoying a meal together. After this, they promise to start tackling dungeons together. The next day, on their way to the dungeon, they run into her bodyguard again, who followed Asuna from her house. Him and Kirito get into a duel, and Kirito beats his ass. Then he gets really mad and tries to attack Kirito again, which prompts Asuna to step in and relieve him of his duties as her bodyguard. Then they explore the dungeon and find the boss room, which is where the episode ends. This episode was decent. It was a good setup for this next arc, and there's also a lot of development between Asuna and Kirito that was good. So far, the series has been pretty decent, but we will soon be jumping into what most people consider where the series gets bad, so buckle up I guess, as these next few episodes will be interesting. Episode 9 is arguably the most famous episode in the series, and for good reason. It's pretty good. This episode picks up right where the previous one left off as Asuna and Kirito enter the boss room and pretty quickly get the fuck out of there as soon as they get the info they need. Then we get some more cute lovey-dovey moments between them as they sit down and have lunch. They get interrupted by Klein and eventually some random army guys. Those guys start demanding the dungeon map that Kirito has, and because he's a nice guy, he just gives it to them without much fuss. And he also gives them a warning not to take on the boss with his men being as exhausted as they are. Well, let's just say they don't listen, and of course, they walk off heading towards the boss room. So out of concern, they follow them. They eventually make it to the boss room to find that, unsurprisingly, those guys are getting their asses beat. And we see the commander guy die in the battle. So then we see Asuna and Kirito jump in to fight the boss and get the others out alongside Klein and his guild. But the boss is too difficult to defeat with such a small raid party, so Kirito reveals a new skill that allows him to fight the boss. This skill was supposed to be a secret as it's unique to him and he didn't want it getting out, but there wasn't any other way to defeat the boss, so he just used it. Of course, after activating the skill, he beats the boss after being pushed to within an inch from his life. After that, we see more Asuna Kirito stuff with her being super worried about him and going up to hug him. And we get the explanation of his skill, being dual-wielding, allowing him to use another sword and make for an even bigger combo than normal. And obviously, as you would, he becomes famous for soloing the boss. He gets summoned to Asuna's guild where he is challenged to a duel by the guild master so he can travel with Asuna. And that's essentially where the episode ends. This is a good episode with some setup for some things in the future, so let's see if we can keep this up and still be good more into the future. Alright, episode 10, and it's still going strong in the streak of good episodes. This one picks up right where the last one left off. Kirito gets challenged to a duel. So we see that duel play out, and in this duel, we see some suspicious stuff going on. Kirito's opponent is seemingly able to stop time, or at least move so fast that it looks like time stopped. Kirito loses because of this, and he has to join Asuna's guild. The next part of the episode sees Kirito go on an adventure with Asuna's old bodyguard and someone else from the guild as sort of an initiation. There it is revealed that Asuna's old bodyguard is actually a member of Laughing Coffin, the murder guild that we saw a few episodes back. He paralyzed Kirito and the other guy. He kills the other guy and almost kills Kirito until Asuna shows up and saves the day. Well, almost. She buys enough time for the paralysis to wear off and for Kirito to get the final blow on this guy. The rest of the episode is just more romance stuff between Kirito and Asuna. They eventually kiss and they get married and they even fuck, although we don't get to see that of course. This is a decent episode, but honestly, I think this is where the streak ends. Don't get me wrong, I like romance, I mean my channel is a very good example of that. But Kirito isn't that strong of a character, and with the introduction of another character, it's only going to get worse, but I guess we'll see how the next episode goes by watching it. Now then, episode 11. Well, it was okay. Like, it surprisingly wasn't bad. This is an episode I hear a lot of people hate on, but it honestly wasn't that bad. Was it good? No, but it wasn't bad. This episode starts off with Kirito and Asuna taking time away from the front lines and living the good life in a cabin in the woods. This episode is basically nothing but wholesome moments between Kirito and Asuna. Which is fine, except, as I said, Kirito isn't that strong of a character, so it isn't as good as it could be. We see them going on a date to a lake, just walking around and talking. Kirito decides to tell a ghost story to freak out Asuna, but it turns out that story is true, and they meet the so-called ghost from the story, and it happens to be a little girl. This little girl passes out, so they take her to their place and wait for her to wake up. Then when she does wake up, we learn that she has no memories except for what her name is, which is Yui. So Kirito and Asuna decide to go into the town of beginnings to see if they can get any info about her or her family or anything like that. At the end of the episode, we see some guys affiliated with the same group of idiots who tried to take on a boss completely unprepared. These guys are bullying a woman and some children into giving up their items and from what I can assume from the woman, also sex. which is fucked up by the way, but anyway, they get stopped when Kirito and Asuna hear the woman scream and come running to save the day. And that is pretty much where the episode ends. This episode was fine, but I can definitely tell this is where the series is going to start going downhill. Honestly, I noticed it a few episodes ago, that although the episodes are fine, some really good, the overall story is just mid and I don't really know why that is, but for now we'll continue our walkthrough for this anime and see if it gets any better. Episode 12 is a tearjerker of an episode that failed to get any tears out of me, which is a surprise because I'm a bitch and I normally cry at any moment with sad music swells in any series, but not this time. I guess that goes to show you what I felt about this episode. This is the first episode where I was like, oh come on, that did not happen. The main characters just so happen to get the attention of some AI program that they form a bond with and helps them get them out of a tough fight that they wouldn't have won otherwise. But anyway, let's get into the episode, cause there's more here. So the episode picks up right where the last one left off. Kirito and Asuna are talking to the woman that they saved and are asking if she knows anything about the girl that they found. She says no. They are then interrupted by a woman who is associated with those men from earlier. She thanks Kirito and Asuna for putting them in their place and asks them for some help. She needs help saving her guildmaster and probably lover, and so they go along with it. They head to this super high level dungeon on the first floor. They eventually find who they are looking for, but fall into a trap and have to fight a high level monster, which I already spoiled how this fight goes. Kirito and Asuna get their asses handed to them, and they are saved by Yui, the girl they found. After that, they learn the truth about Yui. She is an AI who is designed to help players who are in distress. However, her functionality was broken right from day one and she couldn't interact with the players at all. Until conveniently, Kirito and Asuna show up, then of course she can interact with players all of a sudden. Of course, their standards were different. Yui was having trouble interacting with players who were in distress, but Kirito and Asuna were probably the happiest players in the game, so there were no problems. Either way, after this, we learn that because she used the system to destroy that monster, she is going to disappear from the game. So Kirito uses those elite hacking skills that were definitely hinted at earlier in the series to save Yui and turn her into a necklace that they can use to turn her back to normal once they're out in the real world. And that is basically the end of the episode. This is the worst episode so far. There were a lot of ass pulls, but let's hope it gets better from here, although I know sadly that this isn't the worst episode in the series. So episode 13 is a weird one. On one hand, it's borderline filler, and on the other, it has an awesome boss fight in it. Well, let's jump into this. This episode starts off with Kirito fishing at a lake, failing to catch much of anything. He then meets an old fisherman and they hit it off. The fisherman says that he wants some soy sauce, so Kirito hooks him up. Then this guy asks Kirito to help him catch some guardian fish. And this is where the episode gets fucking goofy. The animation is wacky and the damn fish design is stupid, but it is admittedly pretty funny. After this, they get called up and have to fight the next boss, which is where the episode gets good. We see how much Kirito is worried about Asuna and even asks her to stay behind, but obviously she won't. So they enter the boss room and the boss just starts wreaking havoc on the place. It kills so many players in such a short amount of time that it's interesting. This episode was a weird one. The first half of the episode is completely skippable. You don't really need to watch it at all. The second half is where all the important stuff is, as it sets up the boss fight and we see the beginning of the fight. This episode was okay because of the first half. It could have been better if it had progressed the plot earlier, or have them get called up at the beginning of the episode and have most of the episode focus on Kirito's worry for Asuna, and that would have been a lot better. But hey, what do I know? I'm not an author. Episode 14 is the end of the Aincrad arc, and it is a pretty good episode despite the cheap bullshit, but let's get into it so you know what I mean. So the episode picks up right at the end of the boss fight that started the last episode. After losing a couple more players, they beat the boss. Everyone is tired and exhausted, not sure how they're going to beat 25 more floors. Except for one player, Heathcliff. He's the only player still standing, and with more than half HP at that. So Kirito, after having already experienced some shady shit from him, decided to test his theory and attacks him while he has his guard down. It is then revealed that he is an immortal object like Yui was, which means he's protected by the system. Kirito then reveals that Heathcliff is Akihiko Kaiba, the creator of the game, who then challenges Kirito to a duel to end the game if he wins. Obviously, with no real way out, Kirito accepts and the duel starts. It seems fair at first, and we see Kirito trying to push himself to win, but one of his swords breaks and he is left open for a strike, but Asuna blocks it with her body after somehow breaking free of the paralysis that everyone else was put under, and she dies. This basically seals the duel as Kirito has lost his will to fight, so he just meekly swings his sword and eventually gets stabbed through the chest. But as he's about to die, he remembers his experiences in the game and Asuna and somehow comes back to life and kills Kaiba. Which is such main character bullshit, but that's how it goes. The game ends and Kirito meets up with Asuna in what they believe to be heaven, I guess, but it's still the game world and they are watching Aincrad be destroyed. They meet up with Kaiba and ask him why the fuck they made this game, and he explains it. After this, Kirito wakes up and tries to find Asuna in the real world, and that is the end of the episode. This episode was okay, but there was so much main character bullshit in the episode that it made the whole thing so stupid and cheap. But other than that, it was a pretty good episode, and pretty emotional too. But anyway, let's get into the second half of this anime, which is way more controversial. Alright, episode 15. They're finally out of the game. Well, Kirito is. Asuna is still in a coma after the game was cleared, along with 300 other players. But we'll get into that. Let's go over the episode. This episode starts with Kirito having a nightmare about SEO, and he wakes up in a panic. Then we finally meet his sister cousin, who, might I say, is nothing like Silica from earlier, so I don't even know why Kirito thought she resembled her in any way. But anyway, she is practicing kendo, and Kirito asks for a sparring match. It's a fun match. She makes fun of his stance, but they start the match. Kirito loses the match due to many factors, like not having real-world experience, as well as his body still recovering from being asleep for 2 years. Kirito goes to visit Asuna in the hospital, where we meet her father and this other creepy-ass motherfucker. After her father leaves, he says some truly unhinged shit, which is honestly hard to sit through. After this, Kirito leaves depressed, and his sister cousin confronts him until morning, and once he wakes up, his sister cousin leaves in a panic, and he gets an email. The email is basically just a picture of what we can assume to be Asuna trapped inside of another game. And that is where the episode ends. This honestly isn't a bad episode. It is a good setup to the next arc, but it is also good to see Kirito in the real world for the first time. We get to see how he interacts with people and other things like that. It is pretty decent. Let's hope we can keep this up. So, episode 16 is the official start of the Alfheim arc, and it's, the episode's fine, I guess, but let's get into it. This episode starts right where the last one left off. Kirito and Egil are talking about that picture at the end of last episode of Asuna. Egil explains that it was taken in a game called Alfheim Online, so Kirito asks to borrow the game so he can get in there and try to save his girl. From there, he jumps into the game, picks his name and race, and enters the game. Of course, because he's the main character, it glitches out and puts him in a random forest instead of the starting town. Of course, because he's the main character, all of his stats from SEO are linked to his account. Of course, because he's the main character, he is still able to have Yui around. Of course, because he's the main character, he happens to meet his sister in-game, although he doesn't know that yet. Either way, this is where the episode loses me. It's kinda just asspull after asspull to make him powerful quickly so he can save Asuna and get out. Which is like, sure, yeah, I totally believe that happened. Makes sense to me. This episode was okay. It was entertaining at least, so there's that. Episode 17 is more of the same crap from last episode. It picks up right where the last episode left off, which I guess I forgot to explain. Well, he got into a fight, and we see the end of that fight. After saving the girl known as Lifa, she wants to thank him, so she offers to buy him a drink so they fly to the closest town. However, Kirito doesn't know how to fly, so first she has to teach him that. And of course, because he's the main character, he masters it almost instantly. Once they fly to this town, they meet up with a friend of Lifa's, and they have a little chat before going to buy a drink at a restaurant. Lifa explains the world and gives Kirito a lot of useful information about the world tree. She also offers to take him there since he doesn't know how to get there. That's when we get the official reveal that Lifa is Kirito's sister cousin. Then it flips to Asuna and the creepy dude talking. He explains that there are still 300 people not awake after SAO was cleared and how it was all his doing. He makes more creepy comments towards Asuna, and the episode essentially ends there. This episode isn't the best, and honestly you can tell how downhill this series has gotten. One thing I will say though real quick is that a lot of people are quick to point out that Asuna has turned into a damsel in distress character after being a badass in SAO. And that is only half true. Although she is someone just waiting to be saved like most damsel in distress characters, she is still fighting back in her own way. She essentially tells that guy to fuck off right to his face and doesn't hold back in making snarky comments either. At the very end of the episode, she also managed to get the code to her cage, which will obviously be used in an escape attempt. This episode was bad, but it can't possibly get any worse, right? Right? Alright, episode 18 is a little better, but still not great. We start the episode in real life from the perspective of Kirito's sister cousin. She reveals to her friend that she won't be partying with them anymore and tells him to tell the rest of the group. Afterwards, in-game, her and Kirito buy some equipment and get ready to head out when they are confronted by Lifa's party. They tell her she can't leave because it would look bad on the party, despite the fact that he told her when she joined that she could leave at any time if she wanted. Kirito steps in and this guy starts to make an ass of himself in public. For someone who cares so much about reputation, he sure doesn't mind pulling his weapon out on a defenseless player. Anyway, after that, Kirito and Lifa prepare to leave. And it switches to Asuna and the creepy guy. This guy is so fucking annoying. He's not even a good villain, he's just disgusting. He makes more nasty comments to Asuna and he reveals to her that Kirito is alive in the real world, which gives her more hope. In this episode, she acts a bit more like a damsel in distress. She isn't as snarky as the previous episode, but she is still taking steps to try and escape on her own. After this, it switches back to Kirito and Lifa's perspective, and we see them flying towards some mountains. They decided to rest up for a bit and take turns logging off. Nothing much happens here except that we learn they're being tracked, and that is where the episode ends. It was better than the previous two, but still not really that great. Episode 19 was the best episode of this arc so far. There was nothing really bad or weird going on, it was just a solid episode. The episode starts with Kirito and Leafa in a cave trying to get to neutral territory. They find the tracker that was mentioned last episode and destroy it, but because the enemy knows where they are, they have to fight, so they fight off their enemies in an admittedly cool fight. Afterwards, they interrogate one of the enemies and get important information about what they were doing. Then they get to the closest town, but Leafa has to talk to her friend who messaged her earlier on in the episode. So she logs out, calls him, and learns about a plot to interrupt an alliance meeting and kill the leader of one of the races attending. The episode ends with them trying to get to the meeting as quickly as possible to stop it. Like I said, this episode was fine. There wasn't anything majorly bad about it like some of the previous episodes, but it wasn't amazing either. It just had one cool fight and that's about it. Episode 20 was another okay one. This is an improvement over the last episode again. This episode starts with Kirito and Leafa heading towards the meeting to stop the attack. Once there, Kirito engages in a fight with the attackers. He shows off his badass moves because he's the main character, and he even pulls off dual wielding again. This fight is actually pretty cool, I won't lie. After the fight, we get a lot of fanservice-y stuff, which if you like, sure, more power to you. Then, Kirito and Leafa explain what they're doing here, and they all agree to team up to take on the World Tree. Afterwards, we cut to Asuna finally using the code she got to escape her cage. Not really making her a damsel in distress anymore in my opinion, but you can let me know what you think. But that's essentially where the episode ends. There wasn't much that happened in this episode, yet it still somehow ended up being the best episode of the Alfheim arc so far. Episode 21 is probably the most infamous episode in Sword Art Online, and for good reason. Let's get into this. This episode starts with Kirito and Leafa making it to the city at the base of the World Tree. While there, the game makes an announcement that they are shutting the servers down for maintenance. Then we briefly cut to Asuna, who starts walking down a corridor. In the real world, Kirito and his sister cousin go to visit Asuna in the hospital. While there, we get the whole incest plotline that really takes shape, and it's not great. In between all of this, we're cutting back and forth to Asuna. She discovered the experiment room and was trying to save the other 300 players and herself still trapped in the game, but gets stopped by the researchers. And of course, they have to be weird creepy tentacle guys, which just makes it way worse. Then we get Leafa crying on Kirito's arm to try and forget about her feelings for her brother cousin. When heading to the base of the World Tree, Yui senses Asuna, and this is where the episode ends. This was a step down from the previous two episodes. This episode was just bad. It even made Asuna's character way worse. She still hasn't given up on escaping on her own, so I wouldn't call her a damsel in distress, but her character has definitely taken a step down. Anyway, let's hope the next episode is better, but I doubt it with the way this arc has been. Episode 22 is another not great one. This episode starts immediately where the last one left off. We see Kirito freak out and fly straight to the top as far as he can go until he reaches the barrier, and then he calls out to Asuna alongside Yui. And thanks to Yui, Asuna heard them, so she drops a card to let them know that she's there. And at this point, she is straight up a damsel in distress character. She is now just waiting for Kirito to save her, which is just so stupid, but anyway. After a bit, Kirito gets a level head and starts to head for the entrance of the World Tree. He tries to take it on himself like an idiot and gets his ass handed to him. He has this whole speech about how he underestimated this game and how this is how he goes out and all that shit, and I was just like, bro, what are you talking about? This isn't even SAO anymore. You can just try again in a minute. As he was going through the monologue, Leafa comes in and saves him. After getting saved, Kirito tries to go back in because he's stupid, and Leafa eventually stops him, but not after finally figuring out that Kirito is her brother cousin. So she freaks out, logs out of the game, and they have a whole conversation that just gives off Sweet Home Alabama vibes. And that is where the episode ends. Definitely not the best episode in the series. I wouldn't call it the worst, but it isn't great either. The Alfheim arc is really where the series took a massive hit, but let's see if it can improve at all heading into the last few episodes. So episode 23 was actually a decent episode after a certain point, but let's get into it. So the episode picks up right where the last one left off with the Alabama stuff. We get a little backstory on Kirito and his relationship to his family. Afterwards, both him and Leafa jump back into the game and have a duel similar to the one that they had in real life. Leafa loses the duel by losing the will to even fight. But from here, Leafa along with her friend help Kirito take on the World Tree, and as you would expect, the fight doesn't go the greatest. They are getting destroyed. Leafa's friend used a self-destruction spell and was able to buy a little time, but it looks like they are about to be overwhelmed. When finally, the raid party that promised to help gets there and helps them clear away the enemies so Kirito can make it to the World Tree. He uses some stupid ass main character powers to get there. It is already established that he shouldn't have any sword skill for dual wielding as the skill doesn't exist, but yet he still somehow pulls off some stupid move that somehow works. Anyway, he makes it to the top, but now he has to find a way to open the door. And of fucking course, because he's the main character, the card Asuna dropped is able to open the door with Yui's help of course, and they teleport inside and that is the end of the episode. The fight minus the ass pull ability was really cool actually. Seeing a whole raid party take this on was pretty cool. The rest of the episode was okay at best and bad at worst, but this made for a fine episode that was pretty entertaining since the fight took up most of the runtime. Episode 24 is a doozy of an episode. Is it good? Nah, I wouldn't say it is. The episode has a lot of problems, but let's get into this episode. This episode picks up right where the last one leaves off with them teleporting to the World Tree. Inside, they find Asuna, who at this point has straight up been turned into a damsel in distress character. After they reunite, the main villain steps in and makes his move. He uses gravity magic to trap Kirito in place and starts to R-word Asuna in front of him, and Kirito tries to move but struggles to get anywhere. After starting to lose hope, Akihiko Kaiba comes in and saves the day, giving Kirito his administrator access because of course. And with that, Kirito, in an admittedly satisfying beatdown, beat the ever-loving shit out of the least threatening, creepy-ass motherfucker in anime. And then he logs Asuna and presumably the other players out of the game, and then he heads off to see Asuna in the real world, and that is where the episode ends. This episode had so much main character bullshit in it that it was hard to enjoy. The R-word stuff also wasn't really the best, and it made the episode extremely hard to watch, and it honestly just wasn't that great of an ending, but there's still one episode left, so let's see if it's any good. Alright, so the actual ending of the series was surprisingly fairly decent. Certainly better than the last episode. We pick up almost immediately where the last one left off. This time, Kirito is in the hospital parking lot where he gets attacked by the main villain with a knife, and straight up, this guy is so unthreatening it's crazy. Like, Kirito is not at full strength, plus he's a teenager. There's no universe where he should be overpowering a full-grown adult, but here we are. And this fight doesn't last long. Kirito wins and we move on. Kirito and Asuna meet in the real world for the first time, and they kiss. After that, we get a time skip of a few months. We jump to them being in school, all lovey-dovey with each other. Afterwards, there's a party where they finally get to celebrate beating SAO. And then, after that, we learn that there's a bunch of other RPGs being made through the same network. After that, we jump into Alfheim again, and we see that Kirito put the entirety of Aincrad in Alfheim, and that he said he was going to conquer it this time. And that is where the episode leaves off. At least this was a solid ending to an otherwise mediocre second half. So, was SAO as bad as we remember it to be? Honestly, yeah. Like, it had a strong start, but as we got further into the series, especially after we got out of Aincrad, the series took a massive dip in quality. There were hardly any good moments in the second half, combined with the incest and SA stuff that it just really left a bad taste in my mouth. But yeah, SAO is fun, but I would definitely not call it good. But at the very least it's entertaining, even if it isn't good, which is more than I can say for some shows.